So if you want to stay dry, don't pack an umbrella. We've been looking, starting last Sunday, at some of the stars of the New Thought movement, teachers from our rich lineage. We looked at Thomas Troward. Today we're going to look at Florence Scovel Shinn. We're going to look next week at Emmett Fox, and then we'll end with Emily Cady. And these teachers, some of them were great speakers, some of them were not. They were all great thinkers. They all wrote meaningful, powerful books and essays, and were really the stars of their day, just like we have the ones that we might think of today, whether it's maybe Deepak Chopra or Eckhart Tolle, or so many of them today. But the ones that we experience today, really, we can trace back many of the very same concepts to these teachers we're going to remind ourselves of, or maybe be reintroduced to or introduced to for the first time in this series. And of course, we can trace it even further back than that, but we're not going to go that far back. So a little bit of a bio on Florence Scovel Shinn. She was born in 1871, and she passed in 1940. And to me, when I think of the time frame, I try to just kind of think of a very broad brushstroke of what was happening historically then. Well, 1871 wasn't that far outside of the Civil War, right? So Reconstruction, big changes in the country. 1940, we were heading deep into really the Second World War. So that big span of time, a lot of history, a lot of life happening. Florence was an artist and also a performer, and she was a metaphysician. She was a New Thought thinker. Her books are short and simple. This is probably the best known of her books. She wrote The Game of Life and How to Play It. She wrote a book called Your Word is Your Wand, another, The Secret Door to Success, and another, The Power of the Spoken Word. This is a tiny little book, but it's packed with some really great basic New Thought, unity, metaphysical concepts and ideas. Her books are filled with real life stories. And of course, they're dated. They're stories of that period of time, but the actual practice of the principles is not time-bound. The actual practice of these principles work whether we're talking about during the time that she wrote and the people who followed her, or where we are in our lives today and the kinds of things that we may be facing. She had a primary focus on things like the power of the spoken word, on visualization, on affirmations, on releasing, on non-resistance, on going with the flow. And I'm going to touch upon 6 of her main themes here in just a moment. In New Thought, if you go back and you kind of take a look at our history in New Thought, women played a predominant role from the very beginning. That cannot be said of really any other religion or spiritual practice. Women played a really strong and powerful role. Unity, for example, really, we say Myrtle Fillmore was the co-founder of Unity, but really, she was the founder. Charles came along somewhat reluctantly. Myrtle founded Unity not because she was trying to found a movement or a teaching. She was just trying to heal herself physically. And Charles came along, and that's a whole other story we talk about in the membership class. But women played a really important role in New Thought, and they still do today. So many of our churches and centers, whether Unity or Science of Mind, tend to be led by women. In her book, The Game of Life and How to Play It, she couldn't get anybody to publish it. Nobody would publish it. She self-published. I didn't know self-publishing went back quite that far. I thought that was kind of a new thing that we did now, that we've got all these great, ways of crafting things and writing things and distributing things. But she couldn't get a publisher, so she published it herself. So I want to share 6 major themes. These are going to be reminders to you. If you have been in a Unity or Science of Mind community for any length of time, none of this is going to sound brand new to you. It's going to be very familiar to you. One of the things, though, that is really valuable is for us to remember the basics and to practice the basics. And as I was going over this again throughout this week, I thought, you know what? There are some improvements I can make to my own practice, and I'm really consistent and disciplined with my spiritual practice. But as I was going through some of this, I thought, there's room for improvement. And I've been at this for a really long time, and I'm really committed to it. So I imagine that maybe some of you might benefit as well from kind of improving your practice a little bit from these ideas. So the first that she was really strong about is this: the power of our words and affirmations in shaping reality. The power of our words and affirmations in shaping reality. She didn't have the benefit of this relatively new field of neurology and studying the way the brain works and synapses and the wiring of the brain. She didn't have the benefit of that. We have the benefit of that now, knowing that this is not just woo-woo, airy-fairy stuff, that there is support for and evidence that can be tracked and understood physiologically in the body, in the brain, with repetition of thought, with repetition of words. I mean, words are kind of the physical form or the audible form of our thoughts, right? And the repetition of that is not, what's the word I'm looking for? The dominant thread of our thinking, the dominant thrust of our thinking builds pathways in our brain. And this is why the early metaphysicians, even though they didn't have the benefit of what we have scientifically to support it, why they knew from experience that there is power in the words that we consistently say, the thoughts we consistently think, the affirmations that we use, that we can and ought to craft positive affirmative statements to help reframe or retrain our minds. Words and thoughts are the seeds of reality, she said. Words and thoughts are the seeds of reality. She suggested that adopting a disciplined practice of positive affirmations was important. And I thought, yeah, I use affirmations, but I'm not so sure that I've been as disciplined in my practice of that, in consistently practicing. I pray and I meditate, but I step back and I said, Wendy, when was the last time you really took a look at crafting specific affirmative statements that you could use in this particular thing that you're working on in your life? Am I speaking to anybody else in this room, right? We've learned these things. We know these things. And it's not that we're lazy. It's that we're maybe using other tools and techniques and have forgotten. Wait a minute. Maybe I should spend a little bit of time as I'm thinking about this particular goal I want to achieve or a problem in my life that I want to have resolved. Maybe it would be beneficial for me to think about crafting a short affirmative present tense statement that I could use repeatedly to help retrain my mind. She uses words in her writings that affirmations help us to reshape our inner landscape. I like that, to reshape our inner landscape. Do any of you need some pruning and reshaping in your inner landscape? Well, let me ask you this. I'll put it differently. I know I do. I'll put it differently. Would you like all of the thoughts that you think, that you don't speak, to be audibly broadcast to the world? I rest my case. I rest my case. And yet, in a way, if we really stay with that metaphysically, the ones that we're constantly saying to ourselves, the positive ones or the negative ones, eventually are broadcast, not so much in the word itself that we've been saying, but in the conditions that those words have manifested in our life. Does that make sense? So it's like I said it last week, eventually our thinking catches up with us. Eventually our thinking catches up with us. And so a real strong focus in her teaching is that there is power in our words and affirmations to shape reality. And I like the idea of shaping reality. To me, that is more accurate than saying causing reality, shaping reality. Second is the law of non-resistance, the ability to flow with life's ups and downs. Have you noticed that life doesn't always flow the way you want it to? Have you noticed that? And have you noticed that sometimes it doesn't flow the way you want it to at the most inopportune times? It's like if you could schedule those times when ick happened, it would be easier to handle the ick. Would you not agree? But it usually doesn't work that way. And so in her very simple ways, and she's very entertaining when she writes. She makes very simple statements and very clear way of expressing very basic ideas that do work. It's the idea of flowing with life's events, flowing with the ebb and flow. It's an invitation to stop fighting against life's ups and downs. An invitation to stop fighting against life's ups and downs, to start navigating them with some grace and ease. With some grace and ease. Sometimes I think we might have difficulty with this idea of non-resistance because part of us personally, or maybe in the way that we were raised, or maybe in just our culture in our country tends to lean more this way, that we need to make everything happen. And there's certainly the power of agency, the power of being proactive and moving forward and creating what you want. That's certainly valuable qualities that we don't want to lose. And so this idea of non-resistance, this idea of going with the flow, can look like, to some, being lazy, which it is not. It is not. It's riding the energy of what is happening as it is happening. That's not being lazy. And what also can be problematic for us at times with this idea of non-resistance is we might think it means giving up, defeat. It's why we sometimes have a challenge spiritually with the word surrender, because we think that that might mean giving up and defeat, and it doesn't. It means opening up to something else. It means opening up to the flow of the greater presence or the greater energy that is operative in the situation. If we believe that there's one presence and one power in the universe, whether we call it God or something else, that there's one presence and one power in the universe, then that one presence and one power is everywhere. It's not just in the easy, good times. It's in those times that we might also call the difficult, confusing, ebbing times of life. It's either all or it's not there at all. And I believe with every fiber of my being that there is one presence and one power, operative in your life and operative in my life. The practice of non-resistance is a practice of being willing to open into that and to flow with that when there is this ebb, when this up and down. Florence writes about it in this way. She says, "Nothing on earth can resist an absolutely non-resistant person. The Chinese say that water is the most powerful element because it is perfectly non-resistant. It can wear away a rock and sweep all before it." We know that, don't we? And it's a wonderful model to hold in our mind. She also said, "Once ships come in over a calm sea, so long as a man resists a situation, he will have it with him. If he runs away from it, it will run after him. So long as a man or a woman resists a situation, he, she will have it with them." What do we say? When what we resist persists. What we resist persists. She identifies a client that she was working with who was dealing with this challenge. And the challenge was she had a very critical mother. And so the client decided that the way to deal with the very critical mother was to leave home and get married. And guess who she married? A man that was every bit as challenging and as critical in almost identical ways as mom, right? It's because until we meet something, until we actually meet it and find our own way of being with it, that kind of situation is going to present itself again and again. I see a lot of you nodding, and again and again. It's why Jesus said, agree with thine adversary quickly. It's this idea of if we can bless it, if we can agree with it, if we can not resist it, then it doesn't have power over us anymore. We're not being held hostage to it. She writes of the practice, when there is in him no emotional response to an inharmonious situation, it fades away forever from his pathway. I'm going to repeat that. When there is in him no emotional response to an inharmonious situation, it fades away forever from his pathway. So we see man's work is ever within himself. Take a breath with me. So we see that man's work, woman's work is where? Ever within ourselves. It's why I think Jesus said, why do you notice a speck in your brother's eye and don't deal with the log in your own eye? First take the log out of your own eye, then you'll see more clearly to deal with the speck in your brother's eye. It was, to me, the clearest instruction of the growth is in us. And when we work, and I know you do this, these are reminders. When we work from the inside out, when we clean it up from the inside out, we begin to see that everything looks very different and in a much more positive way, a much more hopeful way. A third main thrust of her teaching is the power of visualization and the spoken word. So not just affirmations, but also painting as clear a picture of whatever it is that we want to experience in our lives. A lot of the New Thought movement began in response to physical healing challenges, to illness challenges. Unity is a result of that. Myrtle Fillmore healing herself through the spoken word and through the power of visualization, healing herself from tuberculosis. Her husband, Charles, eventually figuring, hey, Myrtle was doing something right. I wonder if what Myrtle's doing might help me. He had suffered an accident as a young boy that caused one of his legs to be stunted in its growth. And he thought, well, if this stuff works, I ought to be able to grow my leg as an adult male. He had, for a period of most of his adult life, had been walking with a brace, a limp, and a lift in his shoe. He used visualization to visualize the bones in his legs growing. I don't recall how many years it took, but the end result was he didn't need the brace anymore. He didn't need the lift, and he walked with only a very minor limp. This stuff does work. It doesn't work overnight. But it works. And it works, what do they say in AA? It works if you work it. I'm not sure if that's in AA, but I know it's a true statement. It works if you work it. And it's the idea, and Florence writes about this quite a bit, of consistently holding the vision. This is why we call these things a practice, consistently holding the vision. I remember reading an illustration to support this idea of consistently holding the vision, especially when it seems like nothing's happening. That's an important add-on. Consistently holding the vision, especially when it seems like nothing's happening. And the illustration I remember reading years ago was that of a stone cutter. That a stone cutter, if you watch them, they may be hammering away, striking at that stone again and again and again, 100 times, and it seems like nothing has happened. And then all of a sudden, there's one strike that cracks the stone. And it'd be so easy for us to be short-sighted and think it was that 101st strike that broke the stone. But that 101st strike was a result of all of the other ones that came before it. It's the idea of consistency. We don't know how many times it's going to take. I mean, think of how practiced most of us are with worry. I think we're pretty practiced with it. We're probably pretty practiced with quite a bit of thinking that's not necessarily uplifting, even if it's understandable. Even if it's understandable that we think the way that we think, or we keep worrying about the things we worry about, but it's not helpful. I mean, when does worry actually result in something positive? I don't think the batting average is too good. Fourth point, I'm going to have to condense this a little bit too, is the law of prosperity. She writes a lot about that, and the early writers wrote a lot about prosperity. Remember, they lived through the Great Depression. They were challenged to practice these ideas themselves during really, really tough times. And the people that bought their books or attended their classes were also likewise dealing with some tough issues. And we stand in a teaching that says we believe that we live in an abundant universe. We really do. We really do. Nature is lavish. It is opulent. It is abundant. Our attitudes, our thinking, our predominant structure of consciousness either attracts abundance into our lives or repels it. We are either an energy that is attracting abundance by the way that we act, the thoughts that we think, what we hold, how we share, how we show up. We are either attracting abundance in our lives or we are repelling it. Fear repels abundance. Joy, optimism attracts abundance. The French have a legend about this. And the legend goes something like this. A poor man was walking along the road when he met a traveler. And the traveler stopped him and said, "You look to be impoverished. You look to be without much. Here is a gold nugget. I give this to you to help you. It's a gold nugget. Take it and sell it, and you will be rich for the rest of your life." And so the poor man took the gold nugget. And he took it at home and he looked at it and he held it and he started to feel differently. He had this gold nugget. Oh my gosh, I'm rich. I could take this today or tomorrow and sell it and I would be rich for the rest of my life. That's what the man said. And he held that gold nugget and he decided he wasn't going to sell it. He was just going to keep it because it made him feel prosperous. He never sold the gold nugget. He became prosperous. He found work, meaningful work. His life started to change, and he didn't have a need to sell the gold nugget. He not only felt prosperous, but he started to be prosperous. Many years pass, and he finds himself in the same kind of situation that he was once in, seeing somebody poor. He said to that man, "Here, take this gold nugget. Sell it, and you will be rich for the rest of your life." And of course, the poor man was eager for it, just like he had been. He took that gold nugget, but he went to the merchant to turn it in, to sell it. And the merchant told him, "This is not a gold nugget. This is a shiny piece of brass. It's not worth much of anything." It's an important legend in that why did the first man become prosperous? He held the same thing. Not a rhetorical question. Why did he become prosperous? Because he felt it, right? He felt it. He felt it. Have you ever had your thoughts and your words be so sour that you felt awful? Why would we not think that the opposite is also true of the power of those words and thoughts and visions that we hold? Just like that man holding that gold, what he thought was that gold nugget. He felt different. All of our work really is from the inside out, doing what we know will work if we work it consistently, to change ourselves from the inside out, to be that kind of person that is attracting opportunity, attracting abundance instead of repelling it. She writes as well, and you might be happy I don't have the time to go into it, writes as well that there is a direct link, not only to how we feel, but to our willingness to give. There are those of you in this community that give generously and consistently. generously and consistently along whatever is your ability to give. There are those in our community that I have no understanding why they don't give, why they hold back. And I wonder, because there is a principle involved here, if there's not a direct link between what they're experiencing in their life that may not be working, if they're always willing to take and not to give. When we give, we feel abundant. If we give for the right reason and in the right way, not out of guilt. But when we give, we're basically saying to ourselves and to the universe, I have enough and more than enough. Fifth point, and I'll have to just touch on the sixth. The fifth is she writes about and teaches the role of intuition in decision making. Back then, the role of intuition in decision making. How many of you feel like you are intuitive? Let me see by show of hands. Okay. My prayer and my hope is that I might say something to you that will help you get to a place where every hand is raised in this room. Intuition is not something that only some people can have. I think we all have it. We may not know how to recognize it. We may have so much other chatter going on or so many other mental distractions going on that we can't hear or we don't pay attention to that still small voice. We all have the ability to be more intuitive than we are right now. And some of the things that I know help a person become more intuitive is getting familiar with your own sense of a gut feeling. I don't believe that there's anyone in this room who has not at one time had a gut feeling about something. It may have been a gut feeling about something wonderful, or it may have been a gut feeling about something really negative, and that gut feeling protected you. Intuition can guide us to greater good. Intuition, gut feelings, can also warn us of impending threat or danger or some obstacle or something that it would be in our better interest to avoid. Getting to know your own inner voice is a practice. And it's a practice that requires some quiet time. If you're always busy doing and filling your mind, and busy with your hands and filling your mind with stuff, it's going to be pretty hard to know what your inner voice sounds like. And this is why practices like reflection, meditation, mindfulness practice, journaling are so important. If a friend calls you, and not now that we have our phones that tell us who's calling, but in the old days, you know, when you picked up the receiver, right? That's an antique now to some people, right? You picked up the receiver and you heard a voice on the other end of the phone and you recognized the voice. What would have had to have happened for you to have the ability to recognize the voice on the other end of that phone? You heard it before. In order for you to be able to recognize a voice on the other end of that phone, you would have had to have heard it before and recognized it. And recognized it. Our inner voice is very much like that. I don't find in too many cases that it yells and screams. In my life, it's always been pretty darn quiet, which means I have to be pretty quiet and still and willing to listen for it. And not just when I'm meditating, but to keep one ear open, my heart open to it, even when I'm not meditating. So in other words, if you're needing to make a decision about something, you're trying to figure something out, and you're wanting to not just use your own good thinking to try to come up with the answer, but you're trying to be intuitive about it, You practice it in your meditation time. You get quiet. You ask a question. You wait to see if you get any sort of guidance or hunch or gut feeling or sense of knowing, but not just in that meditation time, because it doesn't always come. Have you noticed that? Mine doesn't always come at 6 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it comes, I've heard a lot of people say, when they're showering or they're doing their hair or they're walking. But you gotta keep your ears, the ear of the heart, open. The very last, is it? Yeah, it's the very last. Not that I'm tired, but I always try to be respectful of your time, is she writes quite a bit about the importance of forgiveness. And forgiveness is a big, broad topic depending upon what the issue is that we're trying to forgive. In her writing, she's approaching the more, what's the word I'm looking for? Not the great big traumatic things that might require therapy to work through. She's talking about the more ordinary irritations and grudges and annoyances and bitterness that we might feel over, he did me wrong, he did this, she did that sort of thing, right? And a lot of what she talks about is when we hold on to grudge, when we hold on to bitterness, when we don't let it go, when we can't forgive it, we are blocked. And in order for our life to work better, whether it is physical healing or relational healing or prosperity, we've got to do everything we possibly can to keep ourselves open and not blocked. Unforgiveness ultimately will always keep you blocked, will always keep you blocked. Doesn't mean that you have to go back to the person. Now I'm talking about the big stuff. Doesn't mean you have to go back to the person that may have really harmed you. It doesn't mean that you have to like them. It doesn't mean that you condone the awful things that sometimes people do to each other. But it ultimately means until you can get to a place of holding that differently, letting go of letting go of the bitterness, letting go of the revenge, you're paying for that trauma or that situation again and again and again and again, and it's not hurting them. It's only hurting you. So, as I close, power of words and affirmations, shaping reality, is the main theme of hers. Non-resistance, being able to flow gracefully with the ebbs and flows of life, is another key teaching. The power of visualization, seeing in your mind's eye what you're trying to bring forth consistently, repeatedly. The law of prosperity, attracting abundance by feeling as best you can abundant and being willing not to hoard and hold out of fear, but to be the best channel that you can be. Intuition in decision-making and forgiveness work. Take a breath with me. If there's any part of this that particularly struck you and is helpful to you and wherever you are in your life, you know you can always go back and grab it off of the Vimeo channel, the YouTube channel. And if you're on the Sangha newsletter, then every Tuesday at the bottom of that newsletter, this is true for our virtual congregation as well, that newsletter provides you quick and easy links to all of the things that you might need. So take advantage of that if you're not already on that. Thank you.